What happens when one of Hollywood's most admired actors, a man known for his philosophical streak, effortless Texas charm, and calm authenticity, steps onto the battleground of daytime TV, only to be hit with the most loaded question imaginable? What unfolds isn't your typical celebrity Q&A. It turns into a razor-sharp breakdown of media manipulation, a moment so clear and so controlled that it left one of America's toughest interviewers completely stunned. This wasn't just an interview, it was an X-ray exposing the inner workings of political journalism in real time. This is the story of the day Matthew McConaughey walked onto the set of The View, stared down Joy Behar's carefully engineered trap, and delivered a response so precise, so strategically brilliant, that it instantly became a masterclass in refusing to be boxed in by the media establishment. What he did in that moment didn't just flip the script, it shredded the script entirely. But before we break down this incredible exchange, you need to understand something essential. What you're about to hear is not simply a celebrity sidestepping an awkward question. It's not a talk show disagreement blown out of proportion for clicks, no. This was a moment when the curtain dropped. When the mechanics of political media were revealed in their pure form. When the subtle manipulation wasn't subtle anymore. And when an Oscar-winning Texan made it clear that not everyone in Hollywood is willing to play by the rules of the game. The clash lasted only seconds. One question, one perfectly crafted answer. But the ripple effect, that lasted for days. Social media ignited with arguments about media bias, political labeling, binary thinking, and the pressure placed on celebrities to declare simplistic loyalties on demand. It struck a nerve because it exposed something people were already exhausted by. The endless cycle of gotcha journalism and soundbite warfare. What makes this moment legendary, what makes it worth dissecting, is the flawless precision of McConaughey's reply. He didn't stumble. He didn't dodge. He didn't get irritated or flustered. Instead, he pulled off something far more devastating. He named the tactic, he exposed the setup, and he refused to play along. All in one single line that ricocheted across the internet and resonated with millions who were tired of being forced into political corners. It was verbal aikido at its highest level, redirecting the energy of the attack so effortlessly that Joy Behar never even saw it coming. The day had begun with absolute normalcy. The set of The View glowed under its usual warm lights. The live audience buzzed with excitement, thrilled to see Matthew McConaughey in person. Cameras were locked in place. Sound checks were complete. Everything was running like the finely tuned machine it had been for decades. There was no hint of the storm brewing beneath the surface. McConaughey was booked as the headlining guest, there to talk about his appearance at the U.S. Open, his life with his wife Camilla and their 3 children, and, most importantly, his Green Lights Grant Initiative, a nationwide effort to help schools access billions of dollars in unused federal safety funds. It should have been a simple, wholesome morning segment. Feel-good stories, family anecdotes, a meaningful cause, the kind of interview publicists adore and producers rely on for easy, drama-free ratings. When Matthew stepped onto the stage, he carried that familiar, relaxed confidence, the signature Texas ease that is somehow both grounded and commanding. He waved casually, smiled warmly, and radiated an authenticity you can't fake. The audience responded instantly, erupting with applause. Everything about the moment suggested smooth sailing, but none of them knew what was coming next. Their applause washed over the studio, loud and sincere, the kind of reception reserved for someone whose presence genuinely excites a room. Here was Matthew McConaughey, Oscar winner, cultural icon, star of Dallas Buyers Club, Interstellar, True Detective, The Lincoln Lawyer, and countless other unforgettable films, a man who had somehow stayed down to earth despite surviving 3 decades in the Hollywood spotlight. With a guest like that, what could possibly go sideways? The panel welcomed him with open arms, each host offering their own brand of hospitality. Whoopi Goldberg, the seasoned moderator, delivered her usual polished introduction, though her smile carried a flicker of genuine delight. Sarah Haynes practically glowed, clearly thrilled to interview someone she admired on a personal level. Sunny Hostin greeted him with poised enthusiasm, her posture signaling real interest. Even Alyssa Farah Griffin, the fresh voice of the panel, seemed sincerely pleased to have him there. The atmosphere was warm, friendly, cooperative, exactly the kind of environment designed for a smooth, controversy-free broadcast. Everything was unfolding exactly as Matthew's publicist and the View producers had envisioned during their pre-show planning. A safe zone of soft questions, mutual admiration, lighthearted conversation, and an easy opportunity for Matthew to promote the causes closest to his heart. No friction, no traps, no political ambushes. Just a clean, uplifting morning segment. At least, that's how it looked. But then there was Joy Behar. She sat unusually still during all the cheerful small talk, offering the polite smiles and nods expected of her. But something was off. Anyone familiar with Joy's signature style would have felt the shift immediately. It wasn't open hostility. It wasn't overt tension. It was calculation. A quiet, measured stillness. The kind an experienced predator shows when waiting for the perfect second to strike. She hit it well, too well. On the surface, she seemed fully engaged, but beneath that professional facade was a completely different energy. She was observing, lining up her question, polishing it like a blade, waiting for the moment when Matthew would feel safe enough to let his guard drop. Because that's when Joy Behar strikes best. When the guest believes everything is friendly. Those who understood her patterns could sense the brewing storm, even if Matthew, relaxed, charming, and in his element, had no idea a trap was quietly being assembled right around him. The early part of the interview rolled forward effortlessly, giving no hint of the ambush to come. They talked about his appearance at the U.S. Open, where he'd been seen sitting in Novak Djokovic's box during the men's championship. Matthew recounted the moment Djokovic sprinted over to embrace him after the win, a clip that exploded across social media within hours. He shared warm stories about how Djokovic and his wife Camilla had known each other long before he entered the picture, how the couple had built a friendship with the tennis champion over years of dinners, conversations, and mutual respect. What a surgeon! What a warrior, Matthew said, his admiration unfiltered. The resilience of what he's done is amazing. I was happy to be in his box. I got to sit behind his parents, which was really awesome, to see them when he brings them up. His words, delivered through that signature Texas drawl, felt less like a performance and more like a story told to old friends on a porch. The audience ate it up, laughing, nodding, reacting at every turn. The host chimed in with supportive follow-ups, keeping the conversation relaxed and joyful. Everything seemed perfect. But little did Matthew know. The mood was about to shift. This was the kind of television morning shows dream about, an adored celebrity sharing heartfelt stories, connecting with sports legends, and revealing pieces of himself that audiences rarely get to see. It was comforting, warm, and utterly non-threatening. Viewers at home could sip their coffee, smile, and enjoy a moment of genuine humanity without a shred of discomfort. Everything was flowing perfectly. Then the conversation turned to family, and Matthew's entire presence softened in a way that no acting coach could teach. When the host asked about his 3 children, 15-year-old Levi, 13-year-old Vita, and 10-year-old Livingston, Matthew let out that unmistakable warm laugh that had charmed audiences for decades. "That's probably a loaded question," he joked. "I'm a good dad. We got 20 minutes for this answer." The room erupted in laughter, eager for a genuine moment. And that's exactly what they got. Matthew opened up with a depth that cut through the usual celebrity cliches. "Being a dad was the only thing I ever knew I wanted to be," he said, voice thick with sincerity. He described being 8 years old, shaking hands with his father's friends, big, powerful men he instinctively called Sir, and realizing something profound. Every man he respected was a father. "That's my aspiration," he said. "That's when you become a Sir." The studio fell into a hush, an appreciative silence that only happens when something real cuts through the noise. This wasn't polished PR messaging or a pre-rehearsed emotional beat. This was Matthew McConaughey speaking from his core, about fatherhood, manhood, identity, and the kind of legacy that truly matters. The audience felt it. The panel felt it. And for a fleeting moment, the show felt less like television and more like a shared human experience. Matthew went deeper, reflecting on how a child's personality reveals itself before they can even speak. "The same things I was writing about when they were 2," he said, smiling softly, "are the same things I'm writing about them today." His words painted a picture of a father who watches closely, listens deeply, and cherishes the unfolding of who his children are meant to be. It was beautiful television, the kind viewers remember not because of controversy, but because it reminds them they're not alone in the messy, miraculous journey of raising children. The host nodded with understanding, visibly moved by his honesty and the love pouring through every word. Then the tone shifted. The conversation transitioned into heavier territory, but still within the boundaries of what felt respectful, thoughtful, and agreed upon. They brought up the Uvalde school shooting, the tragedy that shattered Matthew's hometown and thrust him into national advocacy. They recalled his appearance at the White House, where he delivered an emotional plea for action, holding back tears as he spoke about innocent lives lost, including the green Converse sneakers worn by one of the victims. For the first time in the segment, Joy Behar spoke with genuine praise. Or so it seemed. "I want to applaud you for being so outspoken against violence and gun violence in particular," she said. "You're a Texan, and you spoke so passionately at the White House after the shooting at Robb Elementary in your hometown." The panel wore small green pins, a tribute to the victims. Everyone remembered that heartbreaking moment when Camilla held up those green Converse sneakers belonging to 10-year-old Maite Rodriguez, a child whose life was erased in seconds. That image had seared itself into the nation's memory. Matthew nodded, honoring both the loss and the responsibility he felt to prevent future tragedies. This seamlessly led into a conversation about his Green Lights Grant Initiative, a solution-driven program designed to help schools access unused federal funding, to make campuses safer. It was meaningful. It was necessary. It was powerful television. But beneath the surface, the trap was almost ready. Joy leaned in with what appeared to be sincere interest. "Tell us about it," she said. And for a moment, it genuinely seemed like she was inviting a real, meaningful discussion about a program that could save lives. Matthew launched in with calm clarity and unmistakable passion, outlining the issue with the confidence of someone who had done the work, not just talked about it. He explained that after the tragedy at Robb Elementary and other schools across the country, the first bipartisan school safety bill in 30 years had finally passed. Billions of dollars were made available to help protect students. He paused, letting the weight of that achievement settle over the room. "But what I found out months later," he continued, "is that hardly any school districts are applying, and the ones that do, very few are getting approved. The money is still there." He leaned forward, urgency in his posture. "We discovered that the administrators who need to fill out these federal grants, they're also driving the school bus. They're the PE teacher. They're the cafeteria manager. The application is 50 pages long. It's intimidating." The audience laughed as he added, "I don't know about y'all, but I have trouble filling out a customs form without scratching something out." The humor landed, but the message was deadly serious. "These districts don't have the time or the expertise," he said, "but the government wants these grants submitted. They want this money used. It's use it or lose it. And if it's not spent by 2026, it disappears." This wasn't shallow celebrity activism. This was concrete, practical problem solving, identifying a bureaucratic bottleneck and building a system to fix it. It wasn't about speeches or headlines, it was about execution, about saving children's lives. The panel listened with genuine respect, nodding at the specificity of his mission. This was the kind of thoughtful, grounded advocacy that transcended politics. Matthew wasn't playing a role. He was rolling up his sleeves. By all appearances, the segment had found its perfect ending. The audience was informed the message was delivered. Everyone looked good. But Joy Behar had been quietly waiting, patiently coiling, her moment approaching like a shadow, inching across the floor. When Matthew relaxed, when he was open, unguarded, and fully humanized, she struck. In 2021, Joy began, her voice taking on a subtle but unmistakable shift that longtime viewers knew well. "You considered a run for governor of Texas, right?" Matthew nodded politely, sensing a shift but not yet recognizing the shape of the trap forming beneath him. "Do you think political office is in your future?" she continued. The tone was still casual, but there was a sharpened edge underneath, a blade waiting to be revealed. "Can you see that?" On the surface, it sounded innocent enough, logical even. Matthew had been involved in activism. He had once weighed a gubernatorial run. It made sense. And he handled it with grace. "If it's where I'd deem myself to be most useful, then yeah." The audience murmured approvingly. It was measured, thoughtful, humble. Not a yes, not a no, but a willingness to serve where he could do the most good. But Joy wasn't interested in his future. She was setting up the real question, the one she'd been polishing quietly in her back pocket since the interview began. Her smile shifted almost imperceptibly, her eyes sharpened. And then she dropped the hammer. "Do you think you could get elected in Texas being anti-gun?" The oxygen disappeared from the room. The studio felt like it had dropped 20 degrees. Attention snapped across the space so suddenly that everyone felt it. This wasn't a question, it was a trap. An expertly engineered verbal device designed to explode no matter how Matthew responded. If he said yes, he'd be mocked as delusional about Texas politics. If he said no, he'd be cornered into a defensive position that forced him to either backtrack on his advocacy or admit he'd compromise his values for votes. No answer was safe. No path was clean. And buried inside the question was the most dangerous element of all, the label anti-gun. By responding without challenging the premise, Matthew would be accepting someone else's definition of his beliefs. He'd be stepping into a political binary designed to reduce nuanced views into a weaponized soundbite. It was a classic political ambush disguised as a harmless follow-up. He was being maneuvered, not into a conversation, but into a trapdoor, and the entire nation was watching to see whether he'd step on it. This was the trap at its purest form, the kind where complex issues are boiled down into a cheap, binary label. Where decades of lived experience, thoughtful nuance, and carefully considered positions get flattened into a single box. For or against, no space for policy depth. No room for thoughtful distinctions. No acknowledgement of the messy, real-world middle where most people actually live. And everyone on that set recognized it instantly. The other hosts stiffened, shoulders tightening, eyes widening ever so slightly. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew what this was. This wasn't curiosity, this was a setup. A question engineered to go viral regardless of how Matthew answered. The audience fell silent, too. Moments earlier, they'd been laughing and cheering. Now, the tension was thick enough to feel. Somewhere in the control room, producers were probably holding their breath, part thrill, part terror, wondering if they were about to witness television gold or a PR meltdown that would dominate the news cycle for weeks. Matthew sensed it immediately. The warmth in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a sharper focus. His relaxed smile tightened just a touch, enough to notice his posture shifted from easy conversation to alert readiness. The subtle but unmistakable transition from casual sparring to a real fight. Because Matthew McConaughey isn't someone you catch off guard. He didn't survive 3 decades in Hollywood, an industry that eats the unprepared alive by being easy to ambush. And he certainly didn't become one of the most respected actors of his generation by stepping blindly into traps simply because someone disguised them as questions. He repeated Joy's words back to her slowly. "Do I think I could get elected in Texas being anti-gun?" His Texas drawl deepened, each syllable deliberate, controlled. His gaze locked onto Joy's with laser precision, studying not the question but the intent behind it. The calculation was happening behind his eyes in real time. The studio leaned in. Time seemed to stretch. The pause felt longer than it was, because everyone sensed the importance of whatever was about to come next. Cameras zoomed in. Every micro-expression mattered, every breath mattered. And then Matthew did something no one saw coming. He didn't dodge, he didn't deflect, he didn't swallow the bait. Instead, he cracked the entire framework of the trap wide open. His voice shifted, no longer soft or casual but precise, steady, carrying a steel thread that cut straight through the tension. "One thing about me in politics," he began, pointing directly at Joy for emphasis, "is that giving you a direct statement right there is playing a game I'm not interested in playing." Silence. Total, absolute silence. Not the excited kind, not the curious kind, the shocked kind. The kind of silence that hangs in the air when someone just said something no one expected, something that flips the entire script and changes the power dynamic instantly. He continued, driving it home, making sure every person in the studio and every viewer watching at home understood exactly what he meant. "Giving you a direct statement right there," he repeated, still pointing at her, still locked in, "is playing a game I'm not interested in playing." Boom. A complete shutdown. A verbal knockout delivered with flawless precision. Joy Behar, the woman famous for her rapid-fire comebacks, her unshakable confidence, her ability to outtalk just about anyone, had nothing, not a word, not a quip, not even a nervous laugh. Matthew didn't evade the question. Evading would have let the trap remain hidden. He did something far more devastating. He exposed the trap itself, named it, bogged it, refused to enter the frame. It was verbal aikido at its highest level, redirecting the force of the attack so perfectly that the aggressor toppled over their own momentum. Joy's face cycled through a series of expressions. Surprise at being called out so publicly, confusion about how to respond, perhaps even a flicker of reluctant admiration for the sheer elegance of Matthew's counter. And finally, uncertainty. A rare and unfamiliar place for someone so accustomed to controlling the battlefield. Matthew had not only avoided the trap, he'd dismantled it. And in doing so, he changed the entire conversation. For the first time in what felt like years on The View, Joy Behar was caught without a line, without a pivot, without the trademark snapback that had become her armor on live television. The meticulously set trap, designed to box Matthew in, squeeze him into a headline, and hand the internet a soundbite, had been dismantled before she could fully trigger it. And now she sat there, on camera, holding nothing but the broken pieces of a plan that had failed spectacularly. The other hosts weren't subtle about noticing it. Quick glances shot across the table like electric sparks. Whoopi's eyebrows lifted, an expression that said, "This is real television." Sarah looked openly impressed, maybe even relieved, watching Matthew sidestep the trap with such clean precision. Even Sunny, who herself wasn't afraid of aggressive questioning, couldn't hide a flicker of appreciation for the tactical genius she had just witnessed in the audience. You could practically feel the wave of realization ripple through them, heads nodding, eyes widening, people sitting up a little straighter. They understood immediately that they had just witnessed something rare, a moment where the usual rules of daytime TV simply didn't apply. This wasn't celebrity evasiveness. This wasn't a fumbled dodge. This wasn't a PR-trained non-answer. This was a man calmly, clearly, and confidently pointing to the machinery behind the question and saying, "Nope, not playing." What made Matthew's move so brilliant was its restraint. He didn't attack Joy. He didn't get irritated, flustered, or indignant. He didn't deliver a fiery speech about politics, guns, or Texas. He didn't step into the binary framing she tried to force on him. Instead, he stepped outside the frame entirely and revealed the frame itself. It was the simplicity that made it devastating. He identified the game, named it, rejected it, and did so with such clarity that no one, absolutely no one, could accuse him of dodging in bad faith. In under 10 seconds, Matthew McConaughey did what politicians, celebrities, and media personalities have failed to do for decades. He reclaimed his narrative in an environment engineered to rip it away. He exposed the mechanics of media manipulation in real time, and did it without producing a single clip that could be weaponized against him later. This was a masterclass, textbook, pristine, surgical. Joy tried to recover, grasping for a new thread of conversation, but it was too late. Matthew had stamped that moment so firmly, so cleanly, that there was no reclaiming it. Any attempt to push the topic would only confirm his point, that she was fishing for sound bites, not conversation. Any attempt to challenge him again would expose the manipulation even more obviously. She was cornered by her own strategy. But here's where the brilliance goes deeper. By refusing to answer the question, Matthew actually revealed more about himself than answering ever could. He showed he values complexity over caricatures. He showed he prefers real dialogue to political theater. He showed emotional discipline, tactical intelligence, and a refusal to let anyone define him on their terms. For millions of viewers, left, right, and everywhere in between, who are exhausted by gotcha journalism and soundbite warfare, his response felt like fresh oxygen in a suffocating room. It was validation. It was catharsis. It was proof that you can disengage from manipulation without hostility, without cowardice, without running away. It was a reminder that the smartest move isn't always answering the question. Sometimes the smartest move is exposing the question. The interview moved forward, though not with the same ease as before. Conversation shifted to lighter subjects, but everyone, those in the studio and those watching from home, knew the real moment had already happened. Whatever producers might have planned for the headlines didn't matter anymore. It wasn't going to be about Matthew's school safety initiative. It wasn't going to be about his reflections on fatherhood. It wasn't going to be about his friendship with Novak Djokovic. The story had already written itself the moment Matthew McConaughey looked Joy Behar directly in the eye and essentially said, "I see the play you're calling. I understand the strategy, and I'm choosing not to run it." The interview continued on the surface. Matthew expanded on his grant program, offering viewers practical ways to get involved. He touched on upcoming projects, life balance, and staying grounded amid fame. The hosts asked questions. The audience clapped on cue. Anyone tuning in late would have thought everything was perfectly normal. But under that polished daytime TV veneer, something electric still hung in the air. Everyone who had witnessed Joy's attempted ambush and the elegant way Matthew dismantled it could feel it. They just watched a moment that wouldn't fade when the segment ended. A moment that people would be replaying, sharing, and dissecting long after the details of grant applications and school funding had slipped from memory. And when Matthew stood up at the end, shaking hands with the panel and waving to the crowd, he didn't walk off that set the same way he'd walked onto it. He entered as a charming, respected actor promoting a worthy mission. He left as something else, someone who demonstrated that authenticity and intelligence can coexist with celebrity. Someone who refused to let a national platform dictate his narrative. Someone who showed millions of viewers that you don't have to play a game just because someone powerful wants you to play it. And Joy? She maintained her professionalism as the show moved on, transitioning to the next topic like nothing unusual had occurred. But everyone who saw the exchange knew better. Something irreversible had happened. Something you can't spin or soften with a follow-up segment. The hunter became the hunted. The setup was revealed. And the person meant to fall into the trap walked away untouched, while the trap setter didn't. What began as another routine celebrity interview transformed into a cultural flashpoint, a real-time masterclass in navigating media pressure, and it exploded across the internet before the episode had even finished airing. Within hours, clips spread across Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. Every platform was flooded with reactions, debates, and frame-by-frame breakdowns of what had truly occurred beneath the smooth surface of daytime television. Conservative commentators praised Matthew for refusing to be boxed into a political label and standing up to what they saw as a manipulative line of questioning. Liberal commentators commended him for embracing complexity over polarization and for his pragmatic, solution-focused approach to school safety. Centrists applauded him as proof that meaningful dialogue doesn't have to die in the trenches of political extremes. And across that spectrum, left, right, center, one rare theme emerged: respect. Even people who disagreed with Matthew's views on gun policy found themselves admiring the calm, surgical skill of his response. He stayed authentic, he avoided the soundbite trap, and he did it all without arrogance, outrage, or condescension. That balance, firm without being hostile, clear without being simplistic, principled without being preachy, hit home for millions of Americans worn down by the toxic rhythm of political discourse. Matthew McConaughey had just articulated something people were feeling but couldn't quite put into words. A deep, growing exhaustion with the relentless pressure to answer every complex issue with a simple yes or no. A frustration with media setups designed for virality instead of understanding. A hunger for nuance in a culture addicted to binary choices. Because the truth is this: not everything is black and white. Not every issue fits into a headline. And not every question deserves an answer that ignores the complexity of real life. Not every question deserves to be answered just because someone asks it. And not every trap deserves to be stepped into simply because it's been placed in your path. Sometimes the wisest, most grounded, most authentic response is to reject the premise entirely. And Matthew McConaughey understood that instinctively. In those few seconds on The View, he delivered a response that was both disarmingly simple and quietly brilliant. 8 words that flipped the entire moment on its head. That's playing a game I'm not interested in playing. With that single line, he didn't just sidestep a trap, he dismantled it. He refused to let the label anti-gun define him. He exposed the framing of the question as manipulative rather than curious. He reclaimed control of his own narrative in front of millions of viewers. And he reminded everyone watching that public figures do not owe neatly packaged soundbites created for someone else's agenda. That moment raised its own set of questions. Legitimate, complicated ones. Was Joy Behar wrong for pushing him? You could argue it either way. Journalists are supposed to press for clarity. They're expected to ask uncomfortable questions and hold influential voices accountable. That's part of the job. But did Matthew dodge something important? Or did he reveal something even more important about the way these conversations are engineered? Reasonable people will disagree. And that disagreement is the whole point. Should celebrities who speak on political issues be required to commit to firm, public stances? Or should they be granted the same room for nuance that any everyday citizen is allowed? Where is the line between accountability and entrapment? Between journalism and performance? Between inquiry and ambush? These questions don't have easy answers, and that, ironically, is exactly what Matthew was highlighting. Gun policy, like most issues worth discussing, lives in the gray areas. It requires actual thought, real nuance, and a willingness to hold competing truths at once. It cannot be boiled down to a yes-no checkbox or reduced to a slogan made for social media. And in a world obsessed with polarization, Matthew chose a different path. Not by delivering some perfectly crafted statement, but by refusing to participate in the oversimplification machine at all. In that moment, he didn't just avoid a gotcha. He exposed the entire tactic. He modeled a new way to handle loaded questions. And he offered millions of viewers, many tired of the same old political theater, a reminder: you don't have to play a game built for you to lose. Sometimes the most powerful move is refusing to play it at all.